I'm sure that most of you, like me, have seen hypnotists doing their thing where they hypnotize somebody, and willing subjects then will do silly things that they wouldn't do with their conscious mind, and it's really entertaining, and I always laugh about that. And really, it is an amazingly profound experience and demonstration of the power of our subjective mind. Because the subjective mind believes everything that it's told. And so when a hypnotist is working and they tell people to do these things, and then they go about and do it. But this is a reminder to us that every one of us has a subjective mind that does exactly what it's told to do. And generally it is told by the objective mind, the conscious mind of the individual or of someone else. Now, as adults, we, to some degree, are able to filter out what goes into our subjective or our subconscious mind. For children, that's not the case. Because children tend to believe everything that they're told. We're pretty much that way even as adults. But children believe everything that they're told. If they're told that they're bad, yes. Ugly, yes. Whatever. And many times they bring those same beliefs right up to adulthood. And this tends to cloud the truth. Ernest Holmes, our founder, in his book called This Thing Called You, says that we're already perfect. We already know that. I mean, David Arnholder reminds us of that, that we're perfect, whole, and complete. And Ernest goes on to tell us that whatever mistaken beliefs we may have had, we can let go of. In other words, anything that we have thought, we can unthink. Anything that we have done, we can undo on the spiritual level. And mental patterns that have been laid down in the subconscious mind throughout the ages, and we call this race thought, but all of these patterns that have been laid down throughout the ages can be released also. And this means mistaken beliefs about ourselves, mistaken beliefs that we may have brought into adulthood from childhood. It may take a few denials to make this possible, and of course we really want to do it, but it's worth the effort. And it's something that we can do to release ourselves from bondage and fear. Now, our founder, Ernest Holmes, talks a lot about the mystics. And the mystics are deep thinkers from every age. And interestingly, they have tended to come up with essentially the same conclusions. Now, we consider Ernest to have been a mystic, and Thomas Troward certainly a mystic, and some other people, though they didn't consider themselves to be, but as we study their lives, we realize that this was the case. So the mystics are the deep thinkers of every age. And there's a quotation that I want to read to you from Living Science of Mind, which is one of the powerful books by Ernest Holmes. And it says, "In the Bibles of the world and many other sources, one persistent purpose, teaching, and conclusion runs through them all." And and it is this. The universe is a spiritual system, and we're some part of it. God is right where we are and is discovered at the center of our own being. Turning from everything that denies this and quietly contemplating the perfection of the inner person, who is an incarnation of God, we meet the great reality in the only place we shall ever discover it, within our own hearts, souls, and minds. This is a very, very powerful paragraph from this book, and one that we could all make use of. Now, among the mystics, thousands of years ago, there were some women and men that we could now recognize as mystics. In what is now Mexico, who came up with a teaching so that their beliefs and their acceptances would be carried on throughout the ages. And this was called the Toltec. And it has been passed on from generation to generation over those thousands of years to us through a man that we know as Don Miguel Luis. And through his lectures, his workshops, and as far as I'm concerned, through his books, he has been able to communicate some of their teachings to us. Interestingly, what he communicates to us is very congruent with what we study right here in religious science and science of mind. And what he is doing here is trying to correct mistaken ideas, mistaken agreements that we have made in our lives. Now, his most popular book, as far as I'm concerned, is The Four Agreements. As far as I'm concerned also, this is the most popular, the most helpful self-help book that I have ever read. And I've read it a few times, along with a few others. It is written very plainly, and there's a great amount of wisdom that is plainly spoken and written in this book. Now, Ruiz says that we are dreaming 24 hours a day. That's interesting for us, because we don't think we're dreaming when we've got our eyes open and we're in our conscious mind. But it is pretty much in line with what Thomas Trord said, that our subjective mind is always receiving. 24 hours a day, our subjective mind is receiving whatever we're putting into it. Now, in the daytime, our conscious dreaming, we might call it conscious dreaming, is in a frame and linear, and it makes sense to us because it's one thing after another. Our night dreaming, on the other hand, is all over the place. I don't know about you, but I have my night dreams just amuse me, actually, when I think back on them. But our daydreams, our daydreaming is linear and in a material frame. Now, over thousands of years, and longer periods of time than that, the dreams of people have created what we might consider to be society's rule book. And we have to be taught that. And these become the agreements that we make in our life, and we believe them. Now, he refers to this as the domestication of people, or the domestication of humans. And parents and early caregivers have a frightening chore because they are responsible for bringing these children up and teaching them in the right way. On the other hand, they always consider this to be one of the most joyful things that happens in their life. I don't have any children of my own, but I have seen it happen in my family over and over again. Just a few weeks ago, I had a delightful 2-year-old house guest. Her name is Bethany. And Bethany is not domesticated. She had never been to my house before. She didn't really know who I was, nor did she care, actually. But she was my sister's great-granddaughter. And she just immediately made herself at home, was running all over the place and talking all the time. And, of course, I thought it was just wonderful because I'm not responsible for teaching her. But after she had been there a while, one night I looked in my there was a light in my office. And I went in and looked, and it was a flashlight, which I keep downstairs in a special place. And she had brought that flashlight upstairs and turned it on and left it turned on up there. And then she had taken my marking pencils and just moved them all over the place. And I don't know what all else she did because her parents and grandparents were there as well, and I know they were trying to clean up after her. Of course, I could remember when her grandmother was undomesticated also, but I didn't say that to them. In contrast to her, she had an 8-year-old sister with her. The 8-year-old sister was quite domesticated and behaved very properly. Now, in the domestication process, usually there are rewards that are given or withheld. And so people learn, and we know, I know that from training a dog, that we learn what we have to do to get those rewards and what we don't do to have them withdrawn. And so this leads to learning to pretend. So if we don't feel a particular way, we know that it's important to pretend that we do and to act in a particular way. And so this pretending goes on in our lives, and we continue to pretend when we are in school, when we're in church, in our relationships, and this just becomes almost a way of life for us because we're trying to avoid fear. We're trying to avoid something happening in our lives that we didn't want. Now, in our greater human society, which we see on television all the time and read about, we can see that it's a difficult place to live because it's ruled by agreements and beliefs that produce fear. And we're not familiar with a lot of this, and so we think, well, why do they do that? Why do they do this, that, and the other? But it's related to the agreements that they have made in their lives. And every individual, as they become domesticated, creates their own book of law, rules by which they live. And they use this book of law to judge themselves and to judge other people. And some of these things in the book of law are life-enhancing. They're good, but most of them are lies. But we believe them all anyway. And this is our own personal dream. And as I was going through this, it reminded me of growing up in the segregated South. I lived in West Tennessee. I was born and raised in West Tennessee, as most of you know. And during that period of time, everything was segregated. We politely referred to African Americans as colored, but we had signs over water fountains, waiting rooms, and restaurants. Almost every place you went, there were signs for whites and coloreds. In every grade of school, right up through college, everything was segregated. And the African Americans did not or were not welcome to work, to operate and live with the Caucasian, with the whites. And I don't know, when I think about that, I can hardly believe it. And I'm so glad that we have moved so far beyond that it's hard for me to believe. But as I was telling Elizabeth about the University of Memphis, which was totally segregated. There were no African Americans in that school when I took classes there. And of course now it's totally different. It's like it should be. There was no basis for this in the first place. Fortunately, we still had a choice. I had a lot of friends and playmates who were African Americans, and I could choose to treat them in the same way that I did my white friends. Now, because we do have this book of laws that we operate under, we tend to judge ourselves quite harmfully in many cases, and we judge other people because they're not living up to the standards that we have set for ourselves. And so we will tend to wear a mask. Wear a mask so that we think that we are looking more like what we want to be like. Now, Miguel Luis says that just being ourselves is the biggest fear that humans have. That is a very interesting perspective. The biggest fear that we have. And we don't want anybody to think that we're not as good and as magnificent as our book of law has said that we are. And so we judge ourselves, we judge other people, and we abuse ourselves, as he also says that we abuse ourselves more than any other person can ever abuse us. And the sad thing about this, I feel, is that we are dreaming what we may see as dreams of hell. We do not have to dream those dreams of hell because they're not the truth. We can dream a dream of heaven. And unfortunately, if we really feel that we are not living up to the standards we've created for ourselves, we abuse ourselves for not doing that, and we allow other people to abuse us because we think we're no better than that. And that's really sad, and we know there are examples of that too, where people feel that they deserve to be abused because they're not living up to their standards. Now, we live by thousands of agreements. Some of these, most of these probably are made for us, but the most important ones are the ones that we make for ourselves or that we accept as being the truth for us. But just as Ernest Holmes has said, these can be changed. Anything that we have can be released, or better still, replaced. Any negative agreements that we have, if we can replace them, then that's far more powerful than just releasing them. We can replace fear with pleasant dreams of love. We can replace bondage with freedom. We can replace hell with heaven. Now, the first of the 4 agreements that Miguel Luis, and this is the only one I'm going to talk about today, is be impeccable with your word. Be impeccable with your word. Impeccable means without sin, or we might say, because we identify sin as being missing the mark or a mistake. So we can say that impeccable means not missing the mark, being right on the mark. It means not going against one's own self. It means directing energy in the direction of truth and love for ourselves and everyone else. Now that's impeccable. Word is the most powerful quality that we have. The word is a force, and it's very, very powerful, and we need to always remember the power of our word. Now, Thomas Freud wrote a book called The Law and the Word, and some of us just took that class recently and read that book, and he is very emphatic and points out how important our word is. So, if we use it destructively, it can be a disaster. But we don't use it destructively if we are using it impeccably. And when we use it impeccably, we can create beauty, love, and heaven right here on earth. And if we have used it against ourselves in the past, but we can just turn that around and start using it for ourselves impeccably and replace mistakes with divine love. In my own life, I have experienced this. As I grew up, I had lots of beliefs and agreements that were not true for me. And I learned to pretend. And I created a mask for myself. And I am so grateful right now for the Centers for Spiritual Living being a place where we can and are encouraged to be impeccable with our word. And we're open at the top. And so we invite other philosophies to be shared with us. And so we invite people like Miguel Luis to share his books and share his talks and workshops with us. And I am so grateful for Miguel Luis for having a vocabulary, presenting a vocabulary and a path that we can follow to experience the divine good that is our birthright. Now, obviously, I started all this before his book was ever published or before I ever found Science of Mind. And I had begun to release a lot of agreements that were not true for me. I had quit pretending to a fairly good extent, but I was not comfortable because I didn't have anything to replace those beliefs that I dropped. And it's very important for us to be able to replace these agreements with positive agreements, to replace these beliefs with beliefs that are based on truth. And so when I found Science of Mind, the religious science, I was able to replace some of those beliefs that I had already dropped, and I felt better about it. I was able to completely let go of my mask, to be exactly who I was, to relax into my truth. And because of that, I am more comfortable in the Center for Spiritual Living than any other place I know other than my home. And I just invite all of you to have that same feeling here, because it's okay to be ourselves here, because we recognize the truth about ourselves. And so, of course, I'm not saying that I'm through with this. It is, it's an ongoing process, but I do feel that I'm a work in progress, and I'm still having to deal with some of these teeny tiny agreements that pop up that I thought that I had already handled, but no, I haven't. I got to work on that one, and so that's good. So in just a moment now, I'm going to invite us to have an experience of being impeccable with our words. And so we'll do a guided meditation. So I'm going to invite you right now just to close your eyes and be very comfortable in your chair, allowing your chair to support you. Just notice the gentle rhythm of your breathing. And clear your mind. Clear your mind of all thoughts and stuff that keeps running across it as much as you can. And now ask yourself, what beliefs do I have about myself that are not true? Now, if you're like me, you probably have a whole bunch of them. And so I'm going to invite you to just settle on one belief or agreement that you have that is not your truth. And now, what are you going to replace that with? What kind of perfection and divine truth are you willing to accept in the place of that? A new belief is like planting a seed. And our minds are fertile places for these seeds to germinate and grow. And just as you're replacing that one belief right now, I invite you to remember how to do this, and you can take care of the other beliefs and the other agreements that come up. And so I invite you to use your word to create beauty, love, and heaven on earth. And so it is.